grief, loss, and celebrating a life. Grief is what we add on to loss. It is a learnt response, specific to some cultures only. It is not unavoidable. I found this out through my own experience of being immersed for over 8 years in a pure Asian Buddhist culture. In those early years in a Buddhist forest monastery in a remote corner of Thailand, Western culture and ideas were totally unknown. My monastery served as the local cremation ground for many surrounding villages. There was a cremation almost weekly. In the hundreds of funerals I witnessed there in the late 1970s, never once did I see anyone cry. I would speak with the bereaved family in the following days, and still there were no signs of grief. One had to conclude that there was no grief. I came to know that in northeast Thailand in those days, a region steeped in Buddhist teaching for many centuries, death was accepted by all in a way that defied Western theories of grief and loss. Those years taught me that there is an alternative to grief. Not that grief is wrong, only that there is another possibility. Loss of a loved one can be viewed in a second way, a way that avoids the long days of aching grief. My own father died when I was only 16. He was for me a great man. He was the one who helped me find the meaning of love with his words, "Whatever you do in your life, son, the door of my heart will always be open to you." Even though my love for him was huge, I never cried at his funeral service. Nor have I cried for him since. I have never felt like crying over his premature death. It took me many years to understand my emotions surrounding his death. I found that understanding through the following story, which I share with you here. As a young man, I enjoyed music, all types of music, from rock to classical, jazz to folk. London was a fabulous city in which to grow up in the 1960s and early 1970s, especially when you loved music. I remember being at the very first nervous performance of the band Led Zeppelin at a small club in Soho. On another occasion, only a handful of us watched the then unknown Rod Stewart front a rock group in the upstairs room of a small pub in North London. I have so many precious memories of the music scene in London at that time. At the end of most concerts, I would shout, "More! More!" along with many others. Usually the band or orchestra would play on for a while. Eventually, though, they had to stop, pack up their gear and go home, and so did I. It seems to my memory that every evening when I walked home from the club, pub or concert hall, it was always raining. There is a special word to describe the dreary type of rain often met with in London: drizzle. It always seemed to be drizzling, cold and gloomy as I left the concert halls. But even though I knew in my heart that I probably would never get to hear that band again, that they had left my life forever, never once did I feel sad or cry. As I walked out into the cold, damp darkness of the London night, the stirring music still echoed in my mind. What magnificent music! What a powerful performance! How lucky I was to have been there at the time. I never felt grief at the end of a great concert. That is exactly how I felt after my own father's death. It was as if a great concert had finally come to an end. It was such a wonderful performance. I was, as it were, shouting loudly, "More! More!" when it came close to the finale. My dear old dad did struggle hard to keep living a little longer for us. But the moment eventually came when he had to pack up his gear and go home. When I walked out of the crematorium at Mortlake at the end of the service into the cold London drizzle, I remember the drizzle clearly. Knowing in my heart that I would probably not get to be with him again, that he had left my life forever, I didn't feel sad, nor did I cry. What I felt in my heart was, what a magnificent father. What a powerful inspiration was his life. How lucky I was to have been there at the time. How fortunate I was to have been his son. As I held my mother's hand on the long walk into the future, I felt the very same exhilaration as I had often felt at the end of one of the great concerts in my life. I wouldn't have missed that for the world. Thank you, Dad. Grief is seeing only what has been taken away from you. The celebration of a life is recognizing all that we were blessed with and feeling so very grateful. Falling leaves. Probably the hardest of deaths for us to accept is that of a child. On many occasions I have had the honour to conduct the funeral service for a small boy or girl, someone not long set out on their experience of life. My task is to help lead the distraught parents, and others as well, beyond the torment of guilt, and through the obsessive demand for an answer to the question why. I often relate the following parable, which was told to me in Thailand many years ago. A simple forest monk was meditating alone in the jungle in a hut made of thatch. Late one evening there was a very violent monsoon storm. The wind roared like a jet aircraft, and heavy rain thrashed against his hut. As the night grew denser, the storm grew more savage. First branches could be heard being ripped off the trees. Then whole trees were uprooted by the force of the gale and came crashing to the ground with a sound as loud as the thunder. The monk soon realized that his grass hut was no protection. If a tree fell on top of his hut, or even a big branch, it would break clean through the grass roof and crush him to death. He didn't sleep the whole night. Often during that night he would hear huge forest giants smash their way to the ground, and his heart would pound for a while.